A jury in Marion County is recommending the death penalty for a man who killed his wife and 4 children.
TV 20's Taylor Simpson tells us how some feel the fate of Michael Wayne Jones should be decided.
People had different reactions to the jury's decision. Some say he deserved the death penalty, while others say he should spend life in prison.
Michael Wayne Jones Jr. was a father and husband living an ordinary life in Marion County, Florida. To the outside world, his family seemed like any other. But behind closed doors, a dark and chilling story was unfolding, one that would end in unimaginable tragedy. In 2019, the horrifying discovery of the bodies of Jones's wife and 4 children sent shockwaves through the community and the nation. The man who was supposed to protect his family instead became their executioner, leaving a trail of devastation and questions. Tonight, we delve into the harrowing case of Jones, examining how a seemingly normal life turned into a nightmare and what drove a father to commit the ultimate betrayal. Michael Wayne Jones Jr. was born on May 1st, 1981, making him 38 at the time of the murders. Although most of Jones's records have been sealed from the public, we know that his parents separated when he was very young. After his mother remarried, Jones became a target of abuse at the hands of his stepfather. His childhood was marred by early exposure to domestic violence and substance abuse in his family. This led to him developing several mental disorders. However, what illness he had or the extent of the abuse he experienced was not disclosed. His childhood offers an alternate explanation to how his future would turn out, with a failed marriage and criminal activities. He was first married to Sarah Jones and had 1 child with her, but once they got a divorce, Sarah moved to Vermont with their daughter while he continued to live in Marion County, Summerfield, Florida, which was also the place where he met his second wife, Cassie. His life seemed to be normal when he joined the U.S. Marines as a medic, but this did not last for long. After his career with the Marines came to an end, he joined the veterinary clinic where he met Casey and developed romantic feelings for her. On Halloween of 2017, the two of them got married and eventually had children of their own. Cassie even had a YouTube channel and would often put up videos of her little family. In the videos, Jones can be seen playing with their children and goofing around with Cassie. There was no indication of what lay in the future of this family.
It haunts me every day. The images I have of them running around my apartment. Yeah, I mean, why them and not us?
It all began in the summer of 2019 when Jones's wife, 32-year-old Cassie Jones, texted her mother, Nikki Jones, if she could take her daughters, 2-year-old Mercali Jones and 11-month-old Ayanna Jones. Much to her mother's surprise, Cassie, who was usually very fussy about her children, did not come to drop her daughters off. Instead, it was Jones who made the drop-off. However, at this point, she did not think much of the exchange and assumed that Cassie was sick, just like her message had stated. Cassie worked at a veterinary clinic until a back injury forced her to become a stay-at-home mother. Despite the circumstances, Cassie was a loving mother to her 4 children. When a week went by without her hearing from her daughter, Nikki began to grow worried. At that moment, she received another message from Cassie, who claimed that she was still not feeling better and needed her to keep their daughter for another week. To her relief, she would then see Cassie's posts on social media, assuring her that her daughter was well and alive. 2 weeks later, Jones came to pick up his daughters from his mother-in-law's house. Another few weeks went by, and soon, Cassie, who was usually very active on social media, stopped posting at all. At this point, her 2 sisters, Sarah and Brandy Gilbert, began to worry about their sister's lack of communication. Cassie's sons, 9-year-old Cameron Bowers and 4-year-old Preston Bowers, who were with their biological father, Richard Bowers, had their mother miss their birthdays. This immediately made Cassie's sisters concerned, since she would usually make a very big deal out of her children's birthdays. Despite their growing worries, Sarah and Brandy convinced their mother that it was likely that Jones had gotten into trouble with the law again, and the family had disappeared to hide him from the authorities. This was not a strange occurrence in the Jones household, since he had gotten into trouble several times for petty crimes, such as grand theft and burglary. Jones and Casse had met while they were working at the Mount Dora Veterinary Clinic. According to Jones, the two of them met while they were going through their divorces. Casse had divorced her ex-husband, Richard, while Jones divorced his ex-wife, Sarah. Some sources also claimed that the two of them had an affair during their time at the clinic, which eventually led to them divorcing their partners. It was during this time that Jones got into trouble with the law after he got into an altercation with the clinic's owner. Due to this, he broke into the clinic and stole money, computer equipment, and a gun. When he was reported to the police, Casse had covered for him while he fled to Mexico to stay out of jail.
Was there anything else out of the ordinary that you noticed?
Just that plastic on the back.
What plastic?
It looked like it had plastic on the back of where the window is.
Okay, like the windshield?
Yeah, like the back glass.
Was replaced with plastic, or there was just plastic over it?
It looked like it had plastic right there. Like plastic.
Are you talking about like see-through plastic?
Yeah,
like
but it wasn't see-through. But it was
kind of like an opaque saran wrap.
It was like it was a plastic, but not see-through.
My lieutenant's on his way. I don't know if he may want to talk to you. He may just talk to me and see what information I've gotten from you. Is there any other information you might be able to give me that would be helpful?
That's all I know.
Okay.
It went that way.
Towards Sharps Ferry, and then he went towards Baseline, right?
Toward Baseline.
You're positive you turned left on Sharps Ferry?
Turn left.
Okay. Like I said, I do appreciate your time. If you wouldn't mind just hanging out for a minute, my lieutenant's on his way here. He's somewhere on this road. He's just got to find a spot here, so...
Still, Nikki had a sinking feeling that her daughter was in trouble. This is why, on September 14, 2019, she called the police for a welfare check on Casse. When officers arrived at the Jones residence, they found it empty, yet an awful smell lingered in the air. What made the officers suspicious was 2 large containers of cleaner and bleach next to the mop bucket.
All right, and the whole property was cleaned out, correct? And Joe, did you have a cleaning crew come in and clean up, or... Can you hear me, Joe?
What's that?
Did you have a cleaning crew come in and clean up, or did you just have a guy do it?
So I'm going to plead the fifth on that.
Okay. No, I'm just talking about who cleaned up, like not the property. I don't care about the property. Like mopped the floor. Who like mopped the floor and stuff.
Yeah, one of my guys mopped the floor. I'm not sure which one.
Okay. So you didn't like hire a crew to come do it, just one of your guys that normally work for you.
Correct.
Okay. That's all I needed to know. Did the guy that you had clean up, did he tell you he put some fans in all the rooms and have like little fans running?
Yeah, because it smelled.
Okay. Do you know what he used to clean up with? Did he tell you?
No.
Were there any, did you say there were some repairs done?
Alright, officer, I think that's it. I think I'm going to ask you guys to leave.
They questioned the neighbors as well, who confirmed that the smell had been there for a while. Once the officers went inside the house, they also discovered that not only did the entire house smell of human decomposition, but one of the room's floors had also been recently replaced. However, the property manager refused to let the officers continue their investigation without any more proof. The welfare check proved to be useful, and on the morning of September 15th, police eventually put out a missing or endangered advisory for the Jones family.
And I told him, and he remembered this saying, a few years afterwards, because he even quoted it to me, and this was as, I was bringing them to Georgia, but before we left the mall parking lot, when I had picked them up for the first time, he had said, Richard, I just want to tell you, you told me something a few years ago that rings in my ears. And I had told him, I said, when we were in our altercation, I said, brother, I said, you freed me from 13 years of hell. Yeah. And I said, thank you. And he reiterated that to me. He reminded me of that. He said, I want to tell you that I never forgot those words that you told me, because I know now what you meant to this very day. And, you know, he just kind of gave me a brief history of, you know, everything that he's put her through, you know, about how if there's an 80-year-old woman walking down the street, he's got to hold his head down because she would accuse him of, you know, trying to have sex with her, or pretty much any female, because that's what it was with me. But the part that was weird, sir, is he was really cool with me, you know, like he was my homeboy or something, you know, like we were best friends. And that's, I guess, it never dawned on me, you know, of course now it does, but it never dawned on me at that moment that, you know, like, it's almost like that was his apology for everything that he had done. And here I was, you know, I took it hook, line, and sinker, you know, because I'm a forgiving guy, you know, I want to try to see the best in people. And I ate it up, you know, I mean, we even hugged, you know, he shook my hand.
When Richard Bowers, Kasey's ex-husband, saw the missing or endangered advisory, he immediately contacted the police. He later revealed in a police interview that he had picked up the boys on July 27, 2019, from their usual pickup spot. When Jones dropped off the boys, Richard did not think much of it, as he had an argument with Kasey a few days earlier about wanting to keep their sons for the summer. Once again, Jones came to pick up the boys on August 10, 2019. Oddly enough, Jones strikes up a conversation with Richard, claiming that Kasey had filled his head with lies about him, and he wanted to apologize for believing them. Richard assumed that Jones and Kasey had reached a point in their marriage where he was able to see Kasey's true colors and realized that he was being manipulated. The two of them shook hands and even hugged before going their separate ways. This would be the last time Richard would see his children alive. On the same day, September 15th, police in Brantley County, Georgia, responded to a 911 call reporting an accident. Only 170 miles from his home, Jones had lost control of his van and crashed into a concrete sewage tunnel. As soon as officers arrived on the scene to help, they smelled the stench of rotting flesh. Upon asking Jones about it, he confessed to them that they would find the body of his wife, Kasey, in the back of the van. To their surprise, he also confessed to murdering their children and even offered to show the officers where he hid their bodies. Soon after, he led law enforcement officers to a secluded woodland area where the bodies of the 4 children were discovered. This shocking discovery then led to Jones's arrest and sentencing. What hindered the investigation in the early days was Hurricane Dorian, a Category 5 hurricane. Residents of Florida were asked to evacuate to the nearest safe zone. Among the evacuees was Jones, who fled to Vermont and stayed with his ex-wife Sarah for several days. Although Sarah noted that Jones did not make any calls to his children or Kasey, she did not think much of it since she was aware that they had a rocky marriage and often had intense arguments. Jones had also told her that Kasey and their children were with her mother. During his stay at her house, Sarah received phone calls from the Marion County Sheriff's Department asking if she had seen Jones, Kasey, or their children. When Jones told her to lie for him, Sarah, too, put it off as him running from the law again due to minor crimes. This is why she decided to lie to the police, unaware that the bodies of his children and Kasey were still in the back of his van. However, the phone call served as a warning for Jones, and he decided that he needed to leave. On his way back, he got into an accident and was arrested.
Obviously, you were staying with Sarah. Were you with her last night?
I was up there, yes.
Okay. Up there at her place?
Yeah, up in Jacksonville.
Is she staying in apartments?
Yeah, she
okay.
has apartments.
Did you guys hear my phone call and stuff last night? What was the deal with all that?
She woke me up early morning and asked me what was up with, is there any reason why Marion County would be, looking for you? And then I just tried to spin stuff, and finally I said, let me just get on the road. So.
Did you tell her what the heck was going on?
No.
She told us that when you talked to me, or when she talked to me this morning, you were still there. Is that true?
When she spoke to you on the phone, yeah, I was there.
What was going on?
Just trying to figure it out.
You were trying to figure out what I had going on, and
Yeah.
okay. Did she talk to you? Did you tell her what to say to me, or?
No, I one point she thought it was looking for just me, and so I said, you've seen me or whatever, you've seen Casey, you've seen everybody, So yeah, I guess I did tell her.
Okay, so basically, what was the deal with the McDonald's?
McDonald's.
She mentioned something about being at McDonald's. She met you at McDonald's on Friday or something to exchange the kids.
Oh, that's usually a meetup spot.
Okay, so that's your usual meetup spot.
We were going halfway.
So, after that phone call, how long after that phone call do you leave?
I don't think I left out of Jacksonville until like 3.
Okay. Yeah. So you were there for a while. After I called her the first time, did you ever tell her exactly what was going on, or you just kind of, I got to get out of here?
Yeah, I just told her I got to get out of here.
At the police station, Jones cooperated with the detectives and confessed to the murders. During interrogation, he revealed the ruthless way in which he took his family's lives. He narrated that he and Casey got into an argument where she accused him of cheating on her. Although this was not uncommon since she was often paranoid about him cheating, this time she came at him with a baseball bat. He managed to grab the bat from her and beat her with it until she died. Between August 10th to August 28th, he murdered their children. He first killed Cameron by strangling him while holding him down with his knee on the young boy's back. The next day, he killed Preston by using a zip tie around his neck and strangling him. He told the officers that he did this because his hands were tired from strangling Cameron the previous night. It remains unknown why Jones chose to keep his daughters alive for as long as he did. However, on August 28th, he filled the bathtub with water before holding his daughters under the water until they died. Since Jones had been served with an eviction notice by his landlord, he knew that he needed to get rid of the bodies before he was discovered. He packed all of the bodies in totes and bags and carried them around. He evaded getting caught by pretending to be Casey and even continued posting for her. As the days went by, Jones began to feel guilty and wanted to turn himself in. Before he killed his daughters, he even went and sat outside Marion County Sheriff's Department, hoping to build up the courage to turn himself in. As we now know, he could not do it, and proceeded to murder his daughters once he returned home that day.
During our investigation, somebody mentioned some incidents that happened with the boys previously. Had there been any, issues where you disciplined the children or anything like that, and it got out of hand?
Mm-hmm.
How would you discipline the boys?
Most of the time I would separate them, go to the room, but sometimes I would spank them on the butt.
Okay.
Other than that, that was it.
Would you ever spank them with anything besides your hand?
No.
Okay.
Hell no.
There was mention that the boys were disciplined. I don't know if it was a spanking or something. I know that when I was a kid, I'd get spanked with a belt.
Yeah.
Did you ever spank the kids with a belt?
No. I've had that happen. No.
No switch from the tree, nothing like that?
No old school, none of that. It was just a hand.
Somebody mentioned maybe a clothes hanger?
Nope. But that would have been something that happened when they were with their father.
Tell me about that.
A couple of years ago, he was investigated. He had the kids for the weekend. It was Halloween, around Halloween, and the boys came back in their costumes, and the oldest Cameron had a Batman costume, like a one-piece, and he's autistic and he has trouble putting, so it's like, hey, take this off. So I undid it, and as soon as I did, he was going pee, you need to go pee. So I hollered to his mother, and he had bruises all over his lower back.
Really?
Yeah, real bad. And it was investigated in Lake County. We lived in Eustis at the time, and they did investigations, and told her she was going to, there was going to be an arrest made. It never happened. it kind of fell through the cracks. I'm not really sure exactly how, what went on with it, other than that I guess he got an attorney, and he said it might have happened on a bounce house or something like that. But
okay, so that was all kind of pushed to the side.
Yeah.
Throughout his interrogation, Jones remained calm and collected. He also revealed that he was never abusive towards his children, claiming that the boys' father was abusive, and he would often find bruises on their bodies, especially on Cameron, who was autistic and could be a handful. On December 8, 2022, the trial began at the Marion County Judicial Center. He was tried for the second-degree murder of Casey and first-degree premeditated homicide for all 4 children. Since he had already confessed to the murder and pled guilty, the trial went straight to the penalty phase. Since in the state of Florida, the death penalty was still being handed out, the defense tried to make several points to justify his actions. Among some of the points was Jones's traumatic childhood, where he not only suffered from physical abuse, but also sexual abuse at the hands of his paternal figures. They also claimed that Jones suffered from depression and anxiety and was on medication for it. Additionally, they added that Jones was in an abusive relationship with Casey, where she was his abuser. He was often seen banging his head against the walls to silence the voices in his head. According to some sources, Jones claimed that he heard the voice of his wife in his head, telling him to kill their children so that they could be together in the afterlife.
True evil poked its head up here in Marion County. That's about the only best way to describe it. As a father, as a parent, it breaks my heart. As a sheriff, it angers me to no end. Now, as far as I'm concerned, as the sheriff of this county, underneath the jail ain't good enough. He has no right to walk the face of this earth. I hate to be him when he stands before the Lord.
I have never been a fan of the death penalty, but to be very honest with you, these are those cases where I would much rather that happens than that he sits.
The jury unanimously decided to recommend Jones to be put to death. Judge Anthony Tatty sentenced him to death for the murder of the 4 children and life in prison for the murder of his wife, Casey. After his sentencing, Jones refused to beg the judge for mercy. What did you think of the case? Do you think Jones was given a fair sentence? Did he deserve an insanity plea due to the rough upbringing he had to endure?
Imagine returning home, expecting your family to be safe and sound, only to find everything completely burned to the ground. For Harish Kumar, this nightmare became his tragic reality. He came home to utter devastation. The house he'd built with his own hard work was now nothing but ashes, and even worse, his loved ones were gone, taken from him in the most brutal way imaginable. But the pain didn't stop there. Harish had a gut feeling about who was behind this unimaginable act. And now, it all comes down to us asking the same question. Why? Today we're diving deep into every chilling detail of this case, piecing together the clues to uncover the dark truth behind the motive. Because when someone murders an entire family, ties them up, beats them, and sets them on fire without any clear reason, well, you're dealing with a psychopath, plain and simple. To start with, Harish Kumar was the kind of guy who always put in the work. He wasn't one to sit around waiting for things to happen because, obviously, he made things happen. Back in the late 1970s, Harish decided to take a huge leap. He packed up his family and moved them to the United States, chasing the dream of a better life. His wife, Geeta Kumar, was no stranger to hard work either. If anything, she matched him step for step. They balanced each other out perfectly. Harish had the vision and drive, while Geeta had the steady, practical mindset that kept everything grounded. But of course, they didn't have it easy. Like any immigrant family, they faced their fair share of struggles, such as long hours, sacrifices, and tough decisions. But through it all, they refused to let anything stop them. Their relentless hard work started to pay off when, in the 1990s, they took another big step forward and bought a rundown hotel in the Studio City area. Ever since then, Harish and Geeta put their hearts into renovating the property, turning it into a shiny new hotel. They worked day and night, making sure every detail was perfect, and it didn't take long before they started seeing the rewards of their hard work. The Kumars soon expanded their success, developing a whole chain of hotels. Life seemed picture perfect for them. In fact, they had it all: a thriving business, a loving home, and 2 wonderful kids, Paris, their 18-year-old son, and Tulsi, their 16-year-old daughter. They were enjoying the fruits of their labor, feeling like they had finally reached the peak of what they'd worked so hard for. At that time, Harish's mother-in-law, Sitaben Patel, who was 63, also lived with them, and according to some, she was the backbone of the family, making sure the kids were well taken care of while Harish and Geeta focused on running the business. Sitaben was there to ensure everything ran smoothly at home, giving the couple the freedom to grow their business without worrying about their children. But here's the thing: if you're a business owner, you know you're never truly alone. There are always rivals, competitors ready to outdo you, challenge you, or even try to bring you down. And Harish and Geeta were no exception. This is where Victor Govan enters the story. Just like Harish and Geeta, Victor was also a business owner, running a small, run-down hotel right next to the one the Kumar family had worked so hard to build. The 2 hotels were in the same area of Los Angeles, and believe it or not, their dispute started over something that seemed pretty minor: a back alley. Victor had blocked off the alley to expand his property, but Geeta needed that same alley to run her business properly. Naturally, tensions rose, and before long, the Department of City Planning got involved to try to sort things out. But according to Harish, it wasn't anything serious at first. It seemed like a simple problem about a back alley, something that could easily be resolved. He never expected it to lead to what was about to come next. On May 4th, 2002, that's when Harish Kumar decided to step outside of his home to take a breather. That evening, everything seemed like any other normal day. Harish had been working hard, as usual, and decided to take a break by going out to play volleyball with his friends. He walked out of the house with no worries, thinking that his family was safe and sound inside. His wife, Geeta, was home, along with his mother-in-law, Sitaben, and their 2 kids, Paras and Tulsi. By just after 11 p.m., Harish returned home from his game, ready to relax and get some rest. As he pulled into the driveway, he was struck by an unimaginable sight. His home, the place where he had built so many memories with his family, was on fire. Without a second thought, Harish rushed toward the front door, instinctively trying to get inside to rescue his loved ones. But the heat was unbearable. The thick smoke and intense flames blocked his every move. It was impossible to get through. His heart raced as panic set in, knowing that the people he loved most were inside, and there was nothing he could do to save them. So, Harish quickly pulled out his phone and dialed 911, desperately reporting the fire. And within moments, the fire department arrived at the single-family residence in Hollywood Hills, Los Angeles. But the heartbreaking truth was more than Harish could bear. After the flames were finally controlled and the smoke began to clear, detectives made a chilling discovery. This wasn't just a tragic accident. It had been set intentionally. As if the devastation of losing his home wasn't enough, Harish's world was turned upside down when authorities revealed the most horrifying detail of all. His family had been killed before the fire was even set. According to official reports, his family was found in one single room, and their bodies were burned beyond recognition. The charred remains were unmistakably those of his wife, Geeta, their son, Paras, their daughter, Tulsi, and Harish's mother-in-law, Sitaben Patel. The scene inside that room was one that would haunt anyone who laid eyes on it. According to investigators, all 4 victims had been hog-tied, their hands and feet bound tightly together with cords, and their mouths sealed with duct tape. This method of restraint was a glaring sign that something far more sinister had occurred. As Detective Pietrantoni noted, that is an obvious indication that foul play was involved. The victims had clearly suffered before their lives were taken. Jay Moberly, a former LAPD homicide detective, described the gruesome scene, saying they had obviously endured immense heat. He recalled how one of the bodies had a leg burned off up to the knee, further evidence of the severe, relentless heat that had consumed them. Initially, Harish was the first one to come under suspicion. After all, it seemed strange that he wasn't at home when his entire family was there, especially at night. The investigators wondered, how could he have not been around when all this happened? However, Harish quickly provided a solid alibi. He had been playing volleyball with his friends at the time, which was verified by others. He wasn't at the scene when the tragedy unfolded. But there was one thing Harish mentioned during his questioning that really stuck with the detectives. He brought up their ongoing dispute with Victor Govan, the same man we mentioned earlier, who had clashed with Gita over a back alley. As the investigation progressed, new clues began to emerge. Surveillance footage from a nearby house showed that a gray truck had been spotted in the area before and after the fire had started. This piece of evidence raised a lot of questions. What was this truck doing near the scene of the crime? Even more concerning was the fact that when police looked closer, they realized the truck had no license plate. The police immediately began trying to track down the unmarked vehicle, hoping it would lead them to the culprit. But in the meantime, they continued to piece together evidence at the crime scene. As part of their investigation, detectives walked through the house with Harish, knowing he could provide any further insights. When they reached the room where his family had been found, Harish pointed out that some things were missing. Most notably, his wife's case of jewelry, which had contained valuable pieces, and around $5,000 in cash were gone. But despite the missing valuables, investigators were quick to dismiss the idea that this was a simple robbery gone wrong. The crime scene told a much darker story, one filled with hatred and malice. As the investigation deepened, the autopsies revealed even more disturbing details that sent chills down everyone's spine. The victims had been burned alive, something that was confirmed by the smoke found in their lungs. But the horror didn't stop there. Gita and Tulsi, the mother and daughter, both had injuries to their throats. And just when it seemed like the case couldn't get any more twisted, a new lead came to light. Rod Burnson, a former LAPD sergeant and crime reporter for Fox 11, reached out to detectives with some shocking information. He had received a call from an anonymous tipster who claimed to know who was behind the gruesome quadruple murder and the arson. Burnson managed to convince the tipster, named Angelberto Novoa, to meet with investigators and provide more details. Angel revealed that, 6 weeks before the murders, he had been approached by someone to intimidate a few people into signing some contracts. Angel didn't know all the details, but he knew that he would be working with two men, one named Pedro, who drove a gray truck, and another named Freddy. As the investigators listened carefully, they learned that the targets of this scheme had been the Kumars, but things didn't go as planned, and whatever arrangement or deal they had with the Kumars fell apart. The plot thickened when Angel identified one of the men, Freddy, as Victor Govan, the very business rival Harish had mentioned earlier. But the twists kept coming. Detective work led them to another man named Carlos Amador, who had a gray pickup truck registered in his name. The investigators dug into Amador's history and uncovered some unsettling details. He had a record of minor offenses, but what really stood out was that some of those offenses had been committed alongside none other than Peter Govan, Victor's brother. This was the link that investigators needed to connect the dots. Victor Govan, his brother, and their associates were now the primary suspects in what seemed like a carefully orchestrated act of vengeance. Now Peter Govan's criminal record added another layer of intrigue to the investigation. 7 years earlier, he had been convicted for assault with a firearm, yet somehow he had received less than 2 years in jail for the crime. The leniency of his sentence didn't sit well with investigators, who now saw Peter's violent tendencies as part of a bigger pattern. But it was the Govan's business ambitions that truly caught their attention. The Govens had massive expansion plans tied to the disputed alleyway. If they won the rights to it, it would have meant millions of dollars for their business. According to Moberly, this alley was more than just a small plot of land. It was a key to the future of the Govens empire. And it seemed like the Kumars were standing in their way. But what really fueled the anger between the two families wasn't just about business. It was about who was in charge. Investigators discovered that the Govens were enraged by the fact that Harish Kumar had deferred to his wife, Geeta, during their discussions about the alley. We determined that both Victor and his brother were incensed by the fact that they had to talk to Geeta, said Pietrantoni. This simple act of respect, of allowing Geeta to handle negotiations, seemed to have sparked the bitter hatred between the families. The timing of the dispute was also crucial. A hearing was scheduled for May 10th, just 6 days after the murders, to decide the fate of the alleyway. Would the Kumars or the Govens win? According to Fatal Family Feuds, the outcome would have been pivotal. Investigators spoke with city planners who confirmed that Geeta would likely have been granted full access to the alley, and Victor Goven would have been forced to remove any illegal structures he had set up there. This potential loss, combined with the growing animosity, could have been the final straw for the Govens. In their pursuit of justice, investigators turned to a more covert approach. They tapped the phones of Victor and Peter Goven, as well as their associate Amador. Pretending to be auto theft detectives, they managed to speak with Amador and get the VIN number of his truck, the same truck that had been seen in the area around the time of the fire. Around this time, another tipster came forward with crucial information. The witness revealed that Amador had confessed to them about a meeting with two of his Indian friends at a house, claiming they had gone there to get some documents signed. But according to Amador, things got out of hand. The tipster said that Amador mentioned seeing someone's face, and then, in a chilling turn of events, one of the Goven brothers had ordered that everyone in the house be killed and the house set on fire to cover up the crime. This bombshell revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation, but the breakthroughs didn't stop there. The police tracked down a third witness, another individual who admitted that he'd been asked by Amador to act as an alibi. It seemed that Amador was deeply entangled in the Govens' plot and now had no choice but to cooperate with the authorities. Eventually, Amador was apprehended by the LAPD. After being interrogated, he agreed to testify against the Goven brothers, painting a terrifying picture of the events leading up to the brutal murders. According to Amador, he had been there when the Kumar family was ambushed. He described how the victims were tied up, beaten, and brutally threatened before Victor Goven, who Amador referred to as Virendra, ordered that they be killed. The killers then doused the entire house with flammable liquid, setting it ablaze to ensure that no evidence would remain. By late July, investigators had reason to believe that the Govens, aware that Amador had been in contact with the authorities, might be planning to kill their co-conspirator. This added an even darker layer to the case. Not only had they orchestrated the brutal murder of the Kumar family, but they might also be willing to eliminate anyone who could potentially turn on them. After 4 intense weeks of deliberations, the jury finally reached a verdict for Victor Goven, but they couldn't agree on his brother, Peter. The jury foreperson shared that 9 jurors were ready to acquit Peter, while 3 jurors believed he should be convicted. With this split, Los Angeles County Superior Court Judge Kathleen Kennedy Powell declared a mistrial in Peter's case, meaning they would have to start over with a new trial for him. As the court read the verdict for Victor, he remained eerily calm. His eyes stayed downcast, showing no emotion. It was like he wasn't fazed by the gravity of what was happening. Meanwhile, Harish, who had lost his entire family in such a brutal way, was utterly devastated. He was heartbroken beyond words, but still found the strength to speak out about how he never could have imagined Victor could do something so cruel. His voice shook as he said, "Victor was my neighbor, and we were really close. I never thought he would have such a vicious mind to do such a thing." During the same court session, Amador stepped forward and shared what he had seen that night. He told the court in detail how he watched Victor Govan strangle the Kumar family members while Peter Govan joined in the violent attack. But not everyone was buying into Amador's story. The defense team worked hard to undermine his credibility, calling him a liar and even suggesting that he might have been the one who masterminded the whole thing. Victor Govan's lawyer, Richard Steingard, tried to argue that there was no real business dispute between the families and insisted there was no concrete evidence connecting Victor to the crime beyond Amador's testimony. Meanwhile, Peter Govan's attorney, John E. Sweeney, focused on the lack of solid evidence to convict Peter, other than what Amador had said. Sweeney went as far as calling Amador a disgusting, pathetic psychopath, trying to paint him as untrustworthy. But then again, that's what defense attorneys are there for, to stand by the suspect. After 2 years of courtroom drama, Victor Govan was convicted and sentenced to death just before Christmas in 2004. Amador, on the other hand, pleaded guilty to 4 counts of second-degree murder back in 2003, receiving a life sentence. Fast forward on April 4, 2005, and the jury found Peter Govan guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder, confirming that he'd committed the crimes for financial gain during a robbery and burglary and in a brutal multiple murder spree. Just like his brother, Peter was sentenced to death. Tragically, Harish Kumar passed away just a few months after the trial wrapped up. Some say he may have followed his family in spirit, finally at peace, knowing those responsible were brought to justice. But again, we're not done yet. While on death row, Victor Govan, 51, was found in his cell at 10:15 p.m. in 2018 and was pronounced dead at 10:30 p.m. His death occurred 2 days after Orange County serial killer Andrew Urdiales, 54, was also found dead in his cell. It's a chilling pattern that more death row inmates seem to die by their own hands than by execution. So, if you're curious about the case of Andrew Urdiales, let us know in the comments, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on the Kumar massacre too. Do you think Amador deserved a life sentence instead of the death penalty? And do you think the brothers are truly psychopaths for such a simple reason? Share your thoughts below.
War is war. I don't know, what can I say? I think I probably had about the same sentiment as any other soldier. You know, hey, I don't like to kill, but sometimes it can't be avoided.
It wasn't a war. It wasn't a war, and nobody appointed you, and you weren't a soldier.
I was.
On December 24th, 1985, the Goldmark family were preparing for Christmas Eve, getting ready to host a dinner when they heard their doorbell ring. They thought one of their guests had come early, but they were wrong. That was the last time anyone would answer that door. When their guests did arrive, they walked into a house painted in blood, the family tied to chairs, handcuffed, heads bashed in and stabbed. They didn't have any enemies. No one could have imagined something like this happening to a sweet neighborhood family. But it did. And today, we're going to piece together the timeline of what really happened on that fateful night. The Goldmark family seemed to have it all, or at least that's what everyone around them believed. Charles Goldmark, a well-respected lawyer with a knack for winning cases, and Annie, his supportive wife who juggled a teaching career with raising their 2 sons, Derek and Colin. They lived in Madrona, one of Seattle's more upscale neighborhoods. From the outside, they were exactly what you'd expect: 2 bright, well-behaved kids, a beautiful house, and parents who appeared to have it all together. But the Goldmark family had a political past that would be their undoing, and not even because of them, because of someone else's idea of them. In 1962, Charles was a freshman at Reed College in Portland, a school known for its progressive reputation. At the same time, his father, John Goldmark, was running for re-election as a state representative in Washington. But things took a dark turn. 2 local newspapers published stories accusing John of being a communist sympathizer. It's something that happened every day, influential. Ashley Holden, editor of the Tonasket Tribune, claimed John was part of a monstrous conspiracy to remake America into a totalitarian state. Holden and his allies spread rumors through newsletters and articles, and even pointed to Charles getting an admission at Reed College, which had recently hosted a communist speaker, and his mother, Sally Goldmark's brief membership in the Communist Party years earlier. Sally had joined the party during the Great Depression when she was young and struggling. She believed in its promise to help those in need, but left the group after meeting John, who was strictly anti-communist. Despite this, Holden and his supporters twisted her past and used it to fuel a campaign that painted the entire Goldmark family as un-American. The accusations stuck. John lost the election, failing to even secure his party's primary nomination. But the Goldmarks weren't about to let the lies go unanswered, so they hired attorney William Dwyer to clear their name and filed a libel lawsuit against Holden and his collaborators. Hollywood figures who had been targeted with similar accusations testified in support of the Goldmarks. Charles even took the stand to defend his school, saying it was far from having anything to do with communists. The Goldmarks won the case. The judge awarded them $40,000 in damages. But lies don't just disappear so easily. The accusations were passed along over the years, and they made their way towards an anti-communist group known as the Duck Club. By 1985, the old rumors made a comeback, and they would reach the wrong person at the worst possible time. David Rice was a man who believed the United States was on the brink of invasion by foreign troops, allegedly controlled by a Jewish-led communist conspiracy. He thought South American and Korean soldiers were stationed at the borders, waiting for orders to strike. Rice also believed the government couldn't trust its own military to attack American citizens, so it relied on these foreign forces instead. In his mind, it all tied back to a larger plan for a one-world communist government, and he needed somebody to blame. These ideas weren't his own. Rice was heavily influenced by Gordon Jack Moore, a former Army colonel who traveled the country warning about the threat of communism. Moore's speeches and writings appeared in far-right newsletters, some of which circulated in Seattle. Rice treated Moore's words as gospel. And so, Rice came to see the Goldmarks as state enemies, and everything he believed was destroying America. Coincidentally, John also had a big role in Washington state politics. He was a 3-term state representative from Okanogan County, while Sally had a controversial past as a former member of the Communist Party in the 1930s. But the damage had already been done. Rice admired Moore so much that he called him after reading one of his articles. Moore's words gave him a purpose, which was something he hadn't felt in a long time, with one failure after another. Born in Durango, Colorado in 1958, he was a loner who dropped out of high school in the 10th grade. He joined the Navy but didn't make it through boot camp. He got married and had a son, but his wife left him. Even when he found steady work as a welder, it ended with a layoff. By 1982, Rice was in Seattle, living out of his car or staying in shelters. Things changed when he met Ann Davis, a 40-year-old naturopath. They started a relationship, and Rice moved into her Capitol Hill apartment. Soon after, Ann introduced Rice to a local group obsessed with anti-Jewish and anti-communist conspiracies, the Duck Club. Its leader, Homer Brand, was an ex-Boeing employee who didn't trust the government and was equally as paranoid as Rice. Meetings often featured things like Moore's writings, and the group's ideas fueled Rice's wild ideas. He felt like he had a role to play for the first time in his life. The Goldmark family came up in conversation at one meeting, and they were linked to the old rumors of their communist ties. So Rice looked them up at the library and read about John, a former state legislator who had been falsely accused of being a communist. But Rice somehow confused John with his son, Charles, and became fixated on the idea that Charles was a communist leader. By the fall of 1985, Rice had now started following the Goldmarks. He staked out their house twice and even went to Charles's office to see him. Despite all the evidence to the contrary, like the fact that John had been dead for years, Rice convinced himself Charles was a communist. And so, Rice put his plan into motion in December, with Davis out of town. He tested a bottle of chloroform on himself for 6 months straight, trying to figure out how long a person would stay passed out when they come in contact. He realized the longest time frame was about 20 minutes. He felt like that was all the time he needed to do what he needed to do. So, he bought a fake pistol and 2 pairs of handcuffs. He was ready to act. After Reed College, Charles served as an intelligence officer in the U.S. Army before earning a law degree from Yale in 1973. By the mid-1970s, Charles had settled in Seattle, co-founding his own law firm. But Charles was also involved in Washington state politics, serving as legal counsel to the Democratic Party and playing a key role in Gary Hart's 1984 presidential campaign. What few realized, however, was that Charles's family history ended up tearing his family apart. Rice met Charles at a social gathering through Anne's connections at the Duck Club. It wasn't a long or meaningful meeting, but to Rice, it was all the confirmation he needed. The Goldmarks represented everything Rice had come to hate. What he believed was the corrupt communist agenda that had infiltrated American society at the time. Rice's obsession with Charles grew from there. He believed that the Goldmark family weren't just sympathizers, but active agents of communism, even though there was never really any solid proof of that being the case. The only former communists in Charles's history were his parents, but they died decades before Charles ever crossed paths with Rice. Rice's belief was based on a mix of misinformation from the Duck Club and his own paranoia. He became convinced that the only way to protect America was to get information out of the moles and eliminate them, seeing his violent actions as a mission to stop the communist threat. His plan was to break into the Goldmark house, take Charles hostage, and coerce him to reveal the names of other communist leaders. But that's not what happened. Rice's violent past. Rice's violent personality comes from years of emotional trauma and bad choices. He grew up in a toxic, unstable environment. His father was an alcoholic, prone to violent outbursts towards his mother. Rice saw this abuse firsthand, and by the time he reached his teenage years, had become accustomed to responding to conflict with anger. At the age of 15, Rice's parents separated after years of issues. His mother left his father, but he was left to fend for himself emotionally. His resentment built up over the years, and by his mid-teens, he was already becoming a problem in school and, more importantly, with the law. Rice's first run-in with the justice system came at 18 years old in 1991. He was arrested for assault after a violent altercation with a classmate. The incident was serious enough to lead to legal consequences, but not severe enough for going to prison. He received probation, and from that point on, his life went down a downward spiral. Rice struggled to maintain steady work. He jumped from job to job, leaving them after violent outbursts or disagreements with his superiors. His temper became his defining trait. He married his first wife and had a son, but the marriage didn't last very long. His jealousy, controlling nature, and quick temper ultimately led to divorce. He later got into a relationship with Anne, who fed his temper by introducing him to Charles. Rice had now started preparing for what would become the ultimate expression of his rage, planning every detail. Rice was an anti-communist, and his political views were at the center of everything. And everything changed after meeting Charles. Rice's plan didn't happen on a whim. It was methodical, carefully thought out over weeks. He didn't want anyone to fight back, and his target was the Goldmark family because he saw them as part of the system, as part of the people who had betrayed him. Being called a communist was not the only thing that irritated him. He also felt humiliated in front of people he believed he could trust. He had to let out his rage. By Christmas Eve, Rice had everything planned. He knew the Goldmarks would be at home, surrounded by their family and guests. That was exactly what he wanted. The chaos of a crowded house would give him the cover he needed to carry out his mission. At around 7 p.m., Rice stood outside the Goldmark home, holding a white box to make it look like a holiday delivery. A Christmas wreath decorated the front door. When he rang the bell, Colin Goldmark answered. "Charles Goldmark, please," Rice said. Charles came to the door, and Rice pulled out the toy gun hidden behind the box. He forced Charles, Colin, and Derek upstairs to the master bedroom, where Annie had just stepped out of the shower. Charles tried to stay calm and asked if Rice was after money. He handed over the $14 he had on hand. Rice also grabbed a bank card from Charles's wallet and demanded the PIN. Charles gave him a fake one, but Rice didn't know that at the time. Rice didn't think the children would be at the house, but they were, so they too had to be part of the takedown. For him, there was no other option. After that, he ordered the entire family to lie face down on the bedroom floor and cuffed Charles and Annie's hands behind their backs. They struggled at first, confused and frightened, but Rice remained calm and asked for their bank details. They didn't know who he was or why he was doing this, but that didn't matter. Rice wasn't done yet. He knew he had to make sure there was no chance for them to fight back. At around 7:10 p.m., Charles mentioned they were expecting dinner guests at 7:30. The clock was ticking because the guests were about to arrive. The chloroform came next. He used it to subdue the family, rendering them unconscious. There would be no struggle, no noise, just silence, and the vulnerability to what he had planned next. His original plan was falling apart, and there was no time left to extract information from the Goldmarks. Now everyone in the house could identify him. With no other option left on the table, he ran downstairs panicked, grabbed a steam iron and one of Annie's kitchen knives, and returned to the bedroom. Rice beat and stabbed Charles and Annie before turning his attention to the children. Rice beat each member of the family with the steam iron to the head, blowing their skulls open. He thought that would be enough to kill them, but when he went to check the pulse, it was still going. They were all still alive. So he grabbed the knives and stabbed Charles and the children in the head, through the cracks he'd formed in their skulls. Annie's skull hadn't cracked, so he ended up stabbing her in the chest to finish the job. He was driven by paranoia and baseless political beliefs, convinced that Charles was both Jewish and a communist, neither of which was true. After it was over, Rice turned off all the lights, disconnected the phone, and disappeared before the police eventually caught up to him 2 days later. An acquaintance turned him in after finding a note Rice had written, confessing to the attack. Rice had also told Homer Brand, his Duck Club leader, that he had dumped the top communist. These delusions, shaped by extreme political ideologies, led Rice to see the Goldmarks as enemies, deserving of punishment. It was a tragic, senseless act, born from a completely irrational hatred. In his mind, the Goldmarks were political targets, but to anyone else, they were simply an innocent family with no connection to the extreme views Rice held. The entire attack on the Goldmark family lasted less than 20 minutes. No one heard the screaming. No one saw anything. When Rice was done, he wiped the knife clean, taking with him whatever valuables he could find. Money, credit cards, and whatever he thought would give him some kind of twisted sense of victory. Police were called to the scene hours after the brutal attack. The guests had grown concerned after not hearing from the family for several hours. So it didn't take long for officers to break into the home and discover that the entire family had been murdered in cold blood. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came when the Goldmark family didn't open the door when the guests arrived. At first, they didn't understand what was happening, and even though they found it strange, they ended up leaving, only to return when they realized how off everything felt. They rang the doorbell again, and when no one answered the door, a neighbor decided to call 911. By 10:30 a.m., the call came in. The Goldmarks' home was quiet, a little too quiet. The house was locked from the inside, no signs of forced entry. The family was unreachable. A neighbor was equally concerned and sensed something wasn't right. When they focused on the house, they could hear someone moaning in pain. It was Charles. Despite the horrific attack, he and his son Derek had survived. When the police arrived, they saw a horrifying crime scene. Charles, Annie, Colin, and Derek Goldmark were each brutally attacked. There were handcuffs, chloroform, and signs of a violent struggle. The police still couldn't figure out who did this. It didn't take long for investigators to find clues. Chloroform residue and handcuffs pointed to a killer who had subdued and controlled the family before taking their lives. No robbery meant the motive was personal. It became clear. The killer had to know the family. Then came an unexpected break. Authorities traced a delivery van to the scene. At first, it seemed strange, but soon it became crucial. The killer had posed as a delivery man to gain access to the house. Following his movements revealed a timeline and interactions with the Goldmarks, all pointing straight to Rice. The aftermath. When Rice was arrested, the investigation turned darker. He initially tried to deflect any suspicion, but he eventually broke down and confessed to his crimes. In his confession, he revealed that he'd convinced himself the Goldmarks were communist sympathizers. This was fueled by extremist groups like the Duck Club that led him to believe Charles was working against the country, and his mother's ties to communist parties in the past only fed his suspicion. His confession showed his cold, calculated hatred. Rice described how he meticulously planned the attack, believing that he was eliminating a threat to the country by killing the Goldmarks. Despite his lawyers pushing for an insanity defense, Rice was convicted on 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. A decade later, that sentence was reduced to life in prison without parole. One of the more eye-opening moments in the trial came when clinical psychologist Kenneth Muscatel weighed in. Hired by Rice's defense team, Muscatel sat down with Rice for 5 sessions, each about 2 hours long. His report wasn't pretty. Rice showed schizoid and paranoid symptoms, and he heard voices that forced him to act. But according to Muscatel, that wasn't the trigger for the murders. Muscatel pointed to something else: Jack Moore's writings and the influence of people in Rice's life. Ann Davis and Homer Brand from the Duck Club. Rice has also admitted himself that he first learned about the Goldmarks at a Duck Club meeting, and this was where his paranoid fears about an imminent communist threat began. As Muscatel put it, Mr. Rice didn't come up with these ideas on his own. He was part of a group that not only believed in them, but validated them, treating them as rational and crucial. That hit hard for those close to the Goldmarks, but could it all have been avoided if Rice never went to the Duck Club in the first place?
His father had a language barrier on the line. 1846 Western, I need you to stage right now. Stating possibly 2 people have died in that home. Not sure what's going on.
Dreaming of a fresh start, the Chen family, much like many other immigrant families, moved to Guilderland, New York. In their pursuit of a peaceful life, they were struck by a tragedy so gruesome that it shook their suburban community. On October 8, 2014, the Chen family was found brutally murdered in their home, a crime that has yet to be solved and remains a mystery to this day. The lack of motives or possible suspects makes this case particularly perplexing. Investigators are yet to find any connections to the case, which is why, years later, it remains unsolved, clouded by unanswered questions and theories that only add to the haunting nature of the tragedy. Although not much information exists online, we will revisit the horrific events of the crime, a case that serves as a grim reminder of how fragile life can be and how the search for justice sometimes feels impossibly out of reach. 39 years old Chen Jinfeng and his wife, 38 years old Li Haiyan, were natives of Huyu in the province of Fujian. During the early 2000s, the couple decided to immigrate from China to America. Since they had relatives who owned a local Chinese restaurant called King's Walk in Albany, a suburb of Guilderland, they moved into the neighborhood because this meant that Jin would have a stable job to provide for his family. Due to the high number of Chinese immigrants moving from Fujian to New York, Chinatown became known as Little Fuzhou. 2 years after the Chen family immigrated to Albany, Li Han gave birth to their first son, Anthony, in 2004. In 2007, she gave birth to their second son, Edward, or as he was more commonly called, Eddie. The two boys attended a local Guilderland elementary school and were known to be quite active around the neighborhood. While both Jin Feng and Lee were not fluent in English, their young sons had picked up the language from school, which made it easier for them to communicate with others and hence connect with their neighbors. Their neighbors recalled that the two boys were lively and would often come over to their place to play with their dogs. However, not much else is known about the family, and everything indicates that they were an ordinary family of 4 who unfortunately became victims of a brutal crime.
Chen was found downstairs. His wife and children were found upstairs, covered with blankets. Law enforcement described the scene of the murder as horrific.
On the morning of October 8, 2014, a co-worker of Jin Feng became concerned when he did not show up for work that day. What he found strange was that Jin Feng always called ahead of time to inform the restaurant if he was going to be late or absent from work. That afternoon, he, along with a relative of the Chen family, headed to their house on Western Avenue, just a few kilometers away from their workplace, to check up on Jin Feng. When the two of them arrived at the Chen house, they immediately realized something was off. Upon entering the residence, they discovered Jin Feng's body on the first floor. Both his wife, Li Han, and their 2 children, aged 7 and 10, were found on the second floor. Despite the obvious language barrier, they called 911. Jin Feng's relative knew some English, and somehow he managed to communicate that they had discovered 4 bodies and needed police assistance. By the time police and investigators arrived at the scene, the area was surrounded by the locals, who had been left to grapple with the sinister turn of events. The investigators sealed the area and began to scour the crime scene in hopes of finding clues about the quadruple murder. A neighbor reported that as she returned home from work that day, she was shocked to discover the entire area closed off to the public. It was not until she assured the officers that she lived next to them that she was allowed to enter the sealed area. However, despite trying their best to be proactive, the investigation proceeded slowly. The police were left frustrated due to the language and cultural barriers they faced. The fact that Li Han, Anthony, and Eddie's bodies were covered with cloth meant that they might have been collateral damage and that the killer might have felt some sort of remorse. What was even more baffling was the brutal nature of the killings. Investigators reported that a combination of hammer and knife had been used to commit the crimes, but did not specify what the condition of the bodies was. Another issue that the law enforcement officers came across was the lack of witnesses. Those who were willing to come forward did not speak any English. The police struggled to find a translator to help them during the investigation, as many of the Chinese-American families living there had different dialects, and no translator was able to translate all of them. And others did not want to come forward, as many were undocumented and had come into the United States illegally. Because they feared deportation, they did not want to be caught in the middle of the investigation that would result in them being sent back to China. Although the community wanted to help as much as they could, the cooperation with the police was low. To make matters worse, the investigators wanted to go through the surveillance camera footage from the area, but found that there were no cameras that would allow them to see who came in and out of the house during the hours of the murder.
Really working on this story, and we want to inform people that this is a really sad story, and we don't want things like this happen again. It's very horrible, and it shocked me in the morning when I heard about this story.
The Chen's bodies were taken in, and DNA evidence was collected from them. The coroner reported that the murders took place between 3:30 a.m. 6:30 a.m. Thursday. By this time, both national and international media had gotten a whiff of the quadruple homicide, since it was the first of its kind to occur in the Capital District. Reporters from the American Chinese language media also covered the homicide. Initially, the police did not want to release all the information to the public, but since friends and family of the Chen family had already begun talking to the Chinese media, they asked the community to call the helpline with tips. One vital piece of evidence collected was perhaps Jin Feng's and Li Han's iPhones, both of which were locked. The authorities then reached out to Apple and asked the tech giant to give them access to the family's data. Despite their insistence, Apple maintained that they had a strict policy of not sharing their users' data. The law enforcement followed more than 600 leads that took them across the United States, Canada, and China. They feared that the perpetrator had escaped and might have already made his way out of the country. At this point, the community came together and offered their support. Charlie Muller, the local pastor at Victory Church, Albany, told reporters that they were offering a reward of $5,000 for anyone who came forward with leads and information about the case.
One of the most complicated set of circumstances that we've ever experienced in an investigation.
Albany County District Attorney David Soares says he believes someone knows what happened but hasn't come forward. He says this case is a challenge as investigators battle language and cultural barriers and work with people who are scared.
Due to the slow progress of the case, the district attorney for Albany County, P. David Suarez, offered protection from immigration prosecution in hopes that this would encourage witnesses to come forward and help shed light on the case. Later on, Albany County law enforcement joined hands with the NYPD and the FBI to solve the case. The FBI even provided a translator to help translate witness testimonies, but this did not account for much as people did not come forward, and those who came forward did not have any credible leads. In addition to this, Apple released Jin Feng and Li Han's phone data, but even that did not give the authorities any clues. However, some argued that the delay caused any possible trails to grow cold. Despite there not being a lot of information, speculations were made about the motive behind the killings. People speculated that Jin Feng used to host gambling parties late at night, and that their murder was just another gambling night gone wrong. However, this theory was soon debunked by Jin Feng's brother after the report came out in Tsingtao, a local Chinese newspaper. He said that the Chen family hosted small game nights occasionally, but it was not serious enough to result in their homicide. Furthermore, since there had been no previous criminal record, nor any complaints from the neighbors, this theory seemed the least plausible scenario, but many believed that the family knew more than what they were willing to say. A month after the crime, an anonymous source told Newsday that the Chen family had closed down the King's Walk for 2 years and that Li Han had come to the United States illegally. It was widely believed that Jin Feng had been making money through an illegal channel, since he had no other source of income besides the restaurant. Once again, Carol Lawler, the town's police chief, debunked the theory since her department had not found any evidence suggesting any illegal activity. Testimonies from the neighbors also suggested that the Chen family was normal. He claimed that they often saw their children playing in the backyard where Li Han stood close by to keep a watch. He even recalled having brief conversations with Jin Feng, who overcame the language barrier slightly. The multi-jurisdictional investigation spread wide and looked at every possible link and theory. They even investigated links with gangs and human trafficking. An unnamed source reported that Jin Feng was handling large amounts of off-the-books cash that came from an underground economy of undocumented Chinese restaurant workers running from New York City to upstate New York and beyond. Jin Feng might have also been transporting these undocumented workers to different locations, as some sources claimed that a van had been discovered, but this is yet to be confirmed. This theory was not immediately debunked, as 18 mattresses were found in the Chen family home, which suggested that the family had been involved in trafficking undocumented workers. Moreover, the investigators left no stone unturned as they tried to establish a link between 2 other Chinese-American murders. One occurred in 2011 in the state of Mississippi, where a married couple and the wife's sister were murdered in cold blood. Another similar case was found in Texas. A common factor between all 3 cases was not just their ethnicity, but also the fact that they owned family restaurants. However, other than the obvious similarities, the authorities failed to find a connection between the cases and concluded that they were not related. As expected after a heinous homicide, the community was left reeling. A month after the killings took place, the Chen family organized a funeral service that incorporated elements from Chinese culture such as burning incense. The funeral was attended by a large number of people, including friends, family, and the community of Guilderland, who came together to show their support. In the aftermath, fear began to spread through the Chinese-American community, and rightfully so among small business owners who feared that they might become a target as well. Local advocacy groups argued that the immigrant communities needed better support and raised awareness about the challenges faced by them. Furthermore, Marie Wiles, the superintendent of the Guilderland School District, revealed that grief counseling was being made available for students as early as 7:30 a.m. The students at the Guilderland Elementary School made a memorial to honor Anthony and Eddie. They lined the walls of the school with flowers, teddy bears, and candles. Parents reported that this helped their children find comfort in the fact that their friends were being remembered.
Lewis was also there at the memorial and joins us live in the studio with more on tonight's top story. Brandon?
Greg, the memorial continued to grow over the weekend. Some people said they drove by and decided to come back with flowers and candles. Tonight we spoke with several families, including one boy who knew Anthony in kindergarten.
Even though it was a day off from school, Guilderland Elementary students came to pay their respects to classmates Anthony and Eddie Chen, murdered last week in their home on Western Avenue. Fifth grader Sam Oliver remembers at the start of kindergarten when Anthony used to eat lunch alone.
After a while, some kids decided to play with him, and I was one of them. It was probably the nicest kid in the whole school. If someone was sad in class, he would come over and cheer them up. That happened to me once, and he came over and cheered me up.
Eddie was a second grader who loved science and writing. He followed in his older brother's footsteps by joining the garden club this year. Anthony was a fifth grader who also enjoyed nature and drawing. His friends thought he would become an architect.
A lot of people knew him. He was in my grade. He was a very nice kid. I don't think he deserves with that.
Cameron came with his mom to see the growing memorial. While the tragedy has been hard on students, parents have the difficult responsibility of trying to explain it to their children. Some are turning to the memorial to help.
It helps, I think, for him and even my daughter, who's in second grade, to see all the love and support that comes out of such a tragic event.
We don't know who those kids are, but whoever it is, life is so precious to lose. That's the only reason we've come here.
Last week, the district brought in counselors to help, and teachers went the extra mile by traveling with their students to school.
It's been a little comforting having teachers on buses with us, and having teachers and having lots of social teachers at school, so they can understand what's going on with other kids and their emotions.
Students are back in the classroom tomorrow after the long weekend. The school is encouraging parents to continue talking with their children to help them with the grieving process. Live in studio, Brandon Lewis, CBS 6 News.
To this day, family and friends of the Chen family are left frustrated with the lack of answers. On a true crime podcast called All the Time Unsolved, the hosts predicted that despite the DNA evidence found at the crime scene, law enforcement was unable to find any leads. Because if there is any weight to the organized crime theory, it is unlikely that they existed on the police database. Although this theory is yet to be proved, this prediction does not seem far-fetched. Today, the Chen family house has been sold off, but the community has not forgotten about the tragedy that struck their small community. The police chief also commented that every time she passes by the house, she is reminded of the cold-blooded murder that took place and the lack of answers they had. Even today, the police helpline is functional, and authorities have urged anyone who might have information about the case, no matter how trivial, they should contact the New York State Police Major Crimes Unit. What did you think of the case? What do you think is the most plausible theory? Do you think Jin Feng was a part of a much bigger and more sinister crime syndicate? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below.
Now to that tragic story out of Santa Barbara. A surf shop owner accused of killing his 2 young children in Mexico. We are learning more details this morning. They're tough details, and this is a tough story. The FBI says 40-year-old Matthew Coleman confessed to killing his 2 children, 2-year-old son, 10-month-old daughter, with a spear gun before dumping their bodies.
The late 2010s saw a shocking rise in conspiracy theories across the U.S. Perhaps the most notorious of all was the QAnon theory, which suggests that the government is run by Satanists that abuse and devour babies, run a global child trafficking ring, and that want to topple Donald Trump's government. Today we're going to talk about one of the most heartbreaking incidents caused by the QAnon movement and its bizarre beliefs, the case of Matthew Taylor Coleman, also known as the QAnon Dad. It would have been bad enough if Coleman's 2 victims had been adults. As it turns out, they were infants, with the older of the pair being just 2 years old. And to make things even more twisted, they were Coleman's own children. We'll unpack this gruesome series of events that took Coleman and his 2 young children across the border to Mexico, where he dealt them a brutal fate. But first, we must understand the man he used to be and how unbelievable it was he'd do something like this. In 1981, John and Lori Coleman had their first child, a baby boy who they named Matthew, although most came to know him as Matty. The boy seemed to have had the perfect childhood in the sunny coastal city of Santa Barbara, where he learned to surf and ride dirt bikes. By all accounts, Coleman's childhood was almost perfect. He seemed to have no trouble mingling with the girls either, although he had some trouble understanding boundaries with them. In one incident during his teens, Coleman and another boy allegedly cornered a girl in an incident she saw as sexual harassment, indicating that he wasn't the well-adjusted child everyone thought him to be. Something dark lurked under the surface, but no one could see it just yet. However, Coleman seemed to change when he entered high school. He took a sudden interest in Christianity, an interest that was so intense that he could often be seen carrying around a Bible. This interest was no doubt encouraged by his parents, both of whom were devout Christians themselves. They considered Coleman to be a gift from God. Coleman's Christian streak only got more obsessive as he grew older. He decided to attend an evangelical college in San Diego and even went on missionary trips to foreign countries. One of these trips took him to Mexico, where he'd one day return to commit an unspeakable act of brutality against 2 innocents that saw him as their protector. Ironically, Coleman actually showed a profound, wholesome love for children at this stage in his life. According to John Harris, an assistant pastor at Shoreline Community Church, Coleman was always ready to help a child in need. He often helped them do their homework, though he also made sure to mentor them in the ways of the Bible. In all fairness, while Coleman definitely seemed very devout, he wasn't exactly radical in his beliefs. He just wanted to live a life of Christian values. One major aspect of this was starting a family, but Coleman didn't really find that special someone to settle down with until much later in life. Abby Droogsma was your typical all-American girl. Born and raised in Texas, Abby was the sort of person that always wanted to live by the Bible. She always wanted a good Christian man to start a family with, so she'd often go looking for suitors at church groups and other religious events. It was at one of these church groups that she ran into Matthew Coleman. Their chance encounter happened on January 8, 2017, and Abby was immediately attracted to the dashing, devout man who mentored kids in his spare time. They shared a passion for physical activity, with Abby frequently participating in CrossFit classes and encouraging others to get fit. At 36 years old, Coleman was a full 5 years older than Abby. This age gap might have seemed attractive to him because it gave him a sense of authority over the younger woman. Whatever the case may be, both of them found an instant connection and decided to get married not long after they met. It was around this time that the QAnon conspiracy started to take root, and over the next few years, it would poison and ultimately break Coleman's mind. Coleman wanted to live near a beach so he could keep surfing. Abby happened to love the beach too, so the couple rented a ranch house near Hendry Beach, a popular surfing site. This allowed Coleman to start up a surfing school, and once the money started coming in, the couple decided it was time to start a family. What Abby didn't realize was that her children would end up falling prey to their father's violent urges before too long. Their first child, a son they named Kaleo, was born in 2019. His little sister Roxy was born in late 2020. Neighbors reported that Abby was a good mother to the children, often taking them out on walks, where she'd make sure to stop for a friendly chat with the people next door. Abby also loved baking banana bread for her neighbors, along with many other gestures of communal friendship. The picture the community paints of Abby is one of a loving mom, a friendly neighbor, and an all-around good person. Coleman wasn't seen in such a warm light because he usually kept to himself. But the couple shared a tendency to believe in conspiracy theories, and in 2020, something happened that kicked their dubious beliefs into high gear. The pandemic was a rough time for most people, but the Colemans actually did better than before. People needed outdoor activities for their kids that involved social distancing. Surfing usually doesn't involve getting close to other people. It's just you, your surfboard, and the waves. As a result, Coleman's business started booming during the lockdowns. But all was not well in his household. As we've already mentioned, his wife was rather gullible and quickly believed false narratives about the world. For one thing, she was known to be a part of Facebook groups that promoted anti-vaxxing theories. She believed, without any evidence, that the vaccines being made for COVID were somehow dangerous. This was a belief that ran in her family as well, with her family members posting to Facebook about how the pandemic was a planned conspiracy and how the Democratic Party was run by Satanists. As for Coleman, his belief in conspiracy theories had already taken root by the time he settled down. He seemed to believe in something called the Great Awakening, a conspiracy theory that Donald Trump was going to arrest the supposed child abusers and traffickers that controlled the country and restore America to greatness. These beliefs also affected how he saw his children. He felt that Roxy was being born at a time of great change, that she'd see a new dawn emerge in the country. But at the same time, he thought that the government might be run by powerful, demonic figures that started making him extremely paranoid.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
Supporters of QAnon were out in full force at President.
By the summer of 2021, Coleman firmly believed everything that the QAnon conspiracy suggested. He knew in his heart that Donald Trump was fighting a group of child abusers and traffickers, and that he was going to bring about an era of change. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. Abby was also part of his descent into the world of conspiracy. She apparently believed in QAnon as well, which seemed to be a trend among evangelical Christians. Even so, Abby had stated that her husband took things to a whole other level. All of a sudden, everything seemed like a conspiracy to Coleman. More importantly, everything started to seem like a threat. He started noticing people making hand gestures, which he saw as secret signals to harm him and his family. And when he noticed his own friends making the same gestures, he became convinced that they were out to get him too. It is important to note that these gestures could be as simple as making the peace sign. To Coleman's fracturing mind, these common gestures were directed threats to him, and he believed that he needed to take drastic measures. And it wasn't just his family he was worried about either. At some point during 2021, Coleman started to believe that he might just be the only sane person on the planet. Everyone seemed insane to him. Nobody was taking his concerns seriously, not even Abby, who later said that he was taking things too far. In early August of that year, the Colemans decided to plan a family trip. They needed to get out of town and go somewhere they'd feel safe. For Coleman, the walls seemed to be closing in. Everyone was his enemy, especially his friends. He started taking screenshots on social media of every individual making one of these so-called secret hand gestures. That's when he found a picture of his friend holding up the peace sign and became convinced that he was being set up. Coleman was completely divorced from reality by this point. In his view, the devil worshippers in Washington were trying to get to him, and they'd gone so far as to recruit his friends to do it. It's important to know that he broke off contact with many people he'd known since childhood, all because he thought they were trying to plan something evil against him. And if that wasn't enough, Coleman's obsessions with conspiracy theories wasn't just restricted to QAnon. He also started to look into older and more bizarre theories that suggested the whole world was run by a shadow organization of lizard people. These were not the thoughts of a rational man. Indeed, these thoughts belonged to a man who was a danger to everybody, including himself, and particularly his own family. As the family prepared for their trip, Coleman started getting some truly devastating, intrusive thoughts. If his friends were in on the conspiracy, who else might be involved? Could his own wife be working against him as well? And what about his children? An analysis of Coleman's behavior in the lead up to the incident suggests that his thoughts were racing, and he was having trouble seeing things clearly. All he knew was that he had to do something, and on the morning of August 7th, he decided to take action. Abby was busy packing for the family trip that morning. The sun was bright, the weather was great, and she was looking forward to spending some quality time with her husband and children. It was at this point that Coleman picked up both his kids and put them in his car and drove off without a word. Abby was understandably concerned. This was extremely erratic behavior from her husband. He hadn't even taken the children's car seats, indicating that he'd left in a frantic rush. She immediately phoned the police, but clarified that she didn't believe the children were in danger. After all, how could her good Christian husband hurt any child, let alone his own? She was wrong, of course, but then again, Abby was wrong about many things. Hours after Coleman departed, the friend he'd accused of using secret hand gestures came over. He may have wanted to offer his friend's wife some comfort at this time, but the reaction he got was shocking to say the least. Instead of welcoming this family friend into the home, Abby pulled out a picture from 10 years ago where his unnamed friend was making the supposed secret gesture. She then accused him of being in on the whole conspiracy and kicked him out of the house. During this whole time, Coleman was driving further and further away from his Santa Barbara home. He was headed for Mexico, where the bloody climax of this tale will take place. Coleman and his children arrived in Mexico on August 8th. The culprit booked a hotel room, and as he lay in bed, all the pieces started to come together. He claimed that he saw the whole web of conspiracy like code in the Matrix. He felt like Neo when he could see the computer construct for what it truly was. But one of the pieces of hallucinatory code that floated before Coleman's views sent a chill down his spine. He realized that his wife must be in on it. She must be part of the lizard people harming kids across the country. And if she was a lizard person, that meant that she'd passed her serpent DNA onto their children. In this complete break from reality, Coleman knew that there was only one thing he could do. No matter how much he loved his children, he couldn't allow them to grow up and become the mutant alien monsters that he believed were controlling the world. You might think that Coleman was completely isolated at this point, but you'd be wrong. He and Abby had been texting the whole time, although he gave no indication that he'd found out about her supposed connection to the lizard people. His wife told him that she missed him and that she'd found comfort while reading his grandmother's old Bible. In response, Coleman said, "Hi babe, miss you too. Things have been rough but starting to get some clarity as well. Still confused on a lot of things though and processing through them. So many crazy thoughts going through my head right now, hard to explain. Yeah, funny you're getting some clarity through my grandma's old Bibles. Wasn't there two? Anyways, was actually still thinking of burning them in case there's a chip in them or something. Going to keep processing through everything and hope to get some answers. Hope all this craziness ends soon. Love you." These messages, which were exchanged at 3:12 a.m., clearly show that Coleman was past the point of no return. 2 hours later, he'd commit one of the most unimaginably cold-blooded acts anyone could perform. At around 5 a.m., as dawn started breaking over the Mexican horizon, Coleman drove his children to a nearby ranch. The open fields were calm at that time of day and quiet. Coleman parked his car and took his children out, along with a certain item that he intended to use. This item was a spearfishing gun, and its razor-sharp point must have glinted in the dim light, right before it would be covered in the thick, red blood of its victims. Kaleo and Roxy were 2 years and 11 months old respectively. Coleman would have had to carry Roxy out of the car since she was too young to walk. As for Kaleo, he'd probably recently learned to walk, so there's a chance that he just toddled along behind his father. He trusted him. Why wouldn't he? This was the man that had protected him all his life. There's no way to know exactly how the next few minutes went down. All we can say for sure is this: Coleman picked up his spearfishing gun and started wildly stabbing at his children. Kaleo was stabbed 17 times and Roxy was stabbed 12 times, all in the chest. They died on the spot, but Coleman didn't seem to feel any remorse for his actions. Instead, he just hid their bodies under some nearby brush, got back in his car, and made for the US-Mexico border. Not long after, 47-year-old Roberto Salinas Ramirez woke up on his farm. When he headed out, his neighbor told him he'd seen a massive amount of blood right outside his home. Roberto saw the blood and started investigating. It took him a while to find the bodies under the willow brush. They were tiny and pale, difficult to spot in the rocky ground. Both children were naked except for their diapers. Shaken and distraught, Roberto called the police. Hundreds of miles away in Santa Barbara, Abby finally decided to file a missing persons report after not hearing from her husband that morning. During this time, Coleman approached the border, where he was stopped for a security check. When border agents found blood in his van, they immediately took him into custody and called the FBI. Agents soon arrived, and Coleman started confessing his gruesome crimes. He told them his fears about his wife's serpent DNA and that his children might have been infected by it. He told them everything, and the FBI agents couldn't do much but listen to the horrific story. Coleman was on the hook for the homicide of U.S. nationals on foreign soil. He pleaded not guilty, and after a psychological evaluation, a judge deemed him mentally incompetent to stand trial in October of 2023. Instead, it appears that Coleman will be sentenced to mandatory psychiatric treatment. However, Coleman's descent into madness didn't stop while he was in federal lockup. Reports suggest that he repeatedly tries to harm himself with razor blades, forcing prison officials to medicate him against his will. While he awaits a hearing that will transfer him from federal lockup to a psychiatric facility, he was to grapple with what he'd done. Meanwhile, Abby's life is now completely destroyed, but she's managed to profit from the death of her children. A GoFundMe set up in their name reportedly received over $100,000 in donations. But no matter how much money she receives, Abby will have to live with the fact that she encouraged Coleman to go deeper into the conspiracy pit, and that her children's lives were horrifically ended as a result.
Emergency police fire ambulance.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Police fire ambulance.
Okay, I need a call ambulance and the please.
Police and ambulance, okay. What state and town is the emergency in? What state and town is the emergency in?
Montreal.
Where?
55. 55, Montreal.
At around 9 a.m. on July 18th, 2009, Kathy Lynn arrived at the home of her brother, 45-year-old Norman Min Lin, and found that he and his entire family had been bludgeoned to death. Kathy was with her husband at the time, a former surgeon and failed restaurant owner by the name of Robert Leon Bin Z. They'd had dinner with the Lin family just last night and were utterly shocked when they found their loved ones brutally slain in an inexplicable attack. Norman's wife, 44-year-old Lily Yun Lin, and her sister, 39-year-old Irene Yun Bin Yin, were found dead next to the head of the household. And to make matters even more gruesome, Norman and Lily's children, 12-year-old Henry and 9-year-old Terry, had also been slain in a similarly vicious manner. The only survivor was 15-year-old Brenda, who was away on a school trip at the time. What brought about the deaths of this seemingly normal family? That's what we'll be unpacking today. Whenever familicide occurs, the perpetrator is almost always someone that was close to the family. As we'll soon reveal, the police's suspicions would eventually land on Robert Z. But before we get into that, we must understand who the Lins were and why they became the targets of such unimaginable violence. Both Norman and Lily were born in mainland China, but they decided to move to Australia sometime during the early 1990s for university. While attending the University of Sydney, they met each other by chance and immediately felt a connection. Perhaps it was the immigrant experience they shared, or maybe their connection went beyond their mutual Chinese background. Either way, Norman and Lily quickly fell in love, and based on how the timeline unfolded, it's possible that they got married not long after graduating. Brenda was born in 1994, and the Lins moved to the suburb of North Epping to settle down. Henry was born 3 years later, and in the year 2000, the family was complete after the birth of Terry. They became widely respected members of the community and started a local news publication that everyone in the area lined up to read. Over time, this news business would end up raking in $1 million a year. This immense wealth meant that the family was able to live extremely comfortably, and by all accounts, they were a close-knit family. Norman and Lily also showed a deep desire to care for their family members, allowing Lily's sister Irene to live with them permanently. Back in China, other relatives of theirs decided to make the move to the land down under as well. In 2002, Norman's sister Lily managed to migrate to Australia as well, settling in Melbourne instead of Sydney. According to reports, her husband was a celebrated ENT surgeon in China, but despite his years of experience, he wasn't able to get a similar job in this strange new land. Looking at his brother-in-law's success, Z decided to start a restaurant, hoping that he'd become a successful business owner as well. Unfortunately, Z didn't have the same knack for business ownership. By 2005, the restaurant business had folded, and the husband and wife traveled to Sydney to be closer to their successful relatives. Later reports indicate that Z was resentful of Norman's success. He might have been a big deal in China, but in Australia, he felt like any other immigrant. The failure of his business only rubbed salt into his wounds and cemented the decline in status he'd experienced since he'd migrated. However, this wasn't the only factor at play. Unknown to anyone else, Z had perverse sexual inclinations that he managed to keep hidden. This fragile grip on morality wouldn't last for long, though. It would burst out in a violent frenzy that would lead to a vicious act that would shock the entire North Epping community. On July 17th, Lily and her husband joined the Lin family for dinner. This was a frequent occurrence, with the Lins often opening their home up to their relatives to help them feel included. At some point during the night, Lily and Z headed back home. The next morning at around 9 a.m., a crowd of people had gathered around the entrance to the Lins' news business. The family was famed for their punctuality, always opening the shop up well in advance to make sure that everyone got a newspaper on their way to work. But something was different this time around. The minutes ticked by, and the Lins were nowhere to be seen. Once Kathy found out about this, she and her husband rushed to the Lin residence and found the front door unlocked. This is when they entered and found the mutilated corpse of Norman, Lily, and Irene. The two boys were found in their bedroom, completely covered in blood. As for Brenda, she was visiting New Caledonia on a school-sponsored trip. Was it mere coincidence that she wasn't around when the slayings occurred? From the very start, there was evidence to suggest that this was actually by design. For one thing, Brenda's room had been untouched. The door was closed, and her belongings were completely undisturbed, which is odd considering that the attacker went up to Henry and Terry's room to finish them off. This suggested that the perpetrator didn't want to hurt Brenda. In fact, he likely knew that she'd be out of town and possibly timed the incident to take advantage of her absence. Could this mean that the killer had a soft spot for Brenda? As it turned out, the culprit definitely did harbor feelings for the girl, but these feelings were of a twisted and perverse nature. As soon as Kathy found the bodies, she dialed 000, the emergency services number for Australia, and frantically tried to explain what had happened.
Yeah.
What's the problem? What's wrong?
Yeah.
What's wrong? What's wrong?
I'm not sure someone I think I'm not sure.
You need to tell me why you need an ambulance. What's wrong?
Yeah, I think someone died. I'm not sure.
Why do you think someone's dying?
I don't know.
You need to tell me something. You're asking for an ambulance, but why?
Yeah, I also need a place.
Yeah, why? What's wrong?
Because I think someone would die.
Yeah, you need to say why. What have you seen or heard that makes you think someone is going to die? What is wrong? Don't scream. Just answer my questions. What's wrong? Can I talk to someone else? Is there anyone else there?
No,
Who's in the background talking? I've got police on the way, but you need to tell me what's wrong.
Yeah, I need it because I have someone to be killed.
Is someone bleeding? Is someone unconscious?
I think so they died.
Why? Why?
I'm not sure, but maybe someone killed my brother's family.
Kathy seemed completely distraught during this call, so much so that she couldn't even tell the first responder what location she was in. She also spoke in Cantonese at certain points, which later reports revealed were directed at C. She was asking him to stay, begging him in fact, but C said that he had to go and Lily and Kathy's parents from Maryland, a nearby Sydney suburb. Over in New Caledonia, Brenda had no idea what had happened back home. Her parents had told her to stay in touch, but she later said that she was too excited by her first foreign trip to check in. This is understandable behavior given that she was just 15 years old at the time. Even so, she was going to find out one way or another. A few hours after the news broke out, Brenda saw a link to an article about the homicides shared by her friend on Facebook. She couldn't believe what she was reading. She'd said goodbye to her family just a few days ago, and she struggled to reconcile the fact that it was their final parting. When a member of the community called school principal Susan Bridge, she immediately booked Brenda on the next flight home. The sole survivor of the Lynn family arrived in Sydney and was embraced by her sobbing Aunt Kathy. This was when it finally hit her. Her parents, little brothers, and Aunt Irene were all truly gone. All she could do now was wait for investigators to look for a culprit. She stayed with her aunt and uncle as she awaited answers, but while police searched for clues, Brenda would go through a terrifying ordeal at the hands of a relative. But we'll get into that later. First, we need to see how the investigation unfolded. As Z left to collect his in-laws and Brenda made her way home, investigators began combing through the crime scene. They initially thought that Norman might have been responsible for the crime, since his body, unlike those of his family members, was hidden from view. However, it turned out that his corpse was nearby covered in a blanket, effectively eliminating the only lead they had. They could be certain of one thing, though. Whoever committed the homicides was connected to the family. There was no sign of a break-in, suggesting that the perpetrator possessed a key to the home. This unknown culprit also clearly knew the layout of the house, since he'd managed to get to the circuit breaker in the basement, potentially to switch off the lights before he attacked the Lynns. Nothing from the house had been stolen, which confirmed that this wasn't just an opportunistic attack. Instead, the motive behind this incident was clearly personal, and given Brenda's room was untouched, there was a good chance that the perpetrator was especially closely linked to her. The bodies themselves also provided some indication of the motive. Each victim's face was completely bashed in, to the point where they were unrecognizable. Indeed, medical examiners had to use forensic analysis to officially confirm their identities, indicating that they'd been slain in a wild, violent frenzy. Further analysis revealed that the homicides were likely committed with a hammer-like object purchased from a discount store. What's more, 4 of the victims appeared to have been strangled before they were bludgeoned to death. Since the perpetrator had brought the homicide weapon along, it's possible that he was simply venting his hatred towards the victims by trying to asphyxiate them.
I can see everywhere was red. Red everywhere. I think I saw my sister-in-law first. Once I saw her, I hold Kathy and I said, Kathy, don't.
While all of this was going on, Z was interrogated by the police. Back at the Lynn family residence, police also found 24 bloody footprints. They were all the same size, which analysts determined was between 8.5 and 9.5. This confirmed that the attack was committed by a lone perpetrator rather than a gang. On July 29th, Kathy and her husband made an official public plea for information. They asked members of the community to come forward and help them find the person that took the Lynn family away from them. During this time, the police tried every theory they could come up with. They tried linking the case to organized crime groups in China, but the connection was dubious at best, and there seemed to be no other suspect in sight. That is, of course, except for Z. She had just lost family members that had cared for him after his restaurant folded, yet he didn't seem too sad about the incident. Investigators later stated that he joked about a painting hung up at the hospital where the family was declared dead. A few days on, Z was noted talking about a BMW that he'd like to buy. You might ask how he thought he could afford an expensive car if he was unemployed. The answer to that lies with the Lin family business. You see, Z seemed to think that everything the Lins left behind would go to him. He demanded investigators give him the key to the news agency office and made plans to take control of the North Epping home as well. Apart from this, the Lins also had commercial units in Sydney and Maryland that brought in additional income. Z had his eyes on all of these assets, and he grew increasingly frustrated when they stayed outside his grasp. Investigators also discovered another stomach-churning detail that would come up during the subsequent trial, and it had to do with Brenda. Z had always been fond of his niece, even though they weren't related by blood. But about a year before the incident, when Brenda was just 14 years old, he started to get a little too close to her. Reports indicate that he'd rub her shoulders for over 30 seconds at a time, sighing while he did it. It's also alleged that he frequently touched her legs, and that all of these encounters left Brenda feeling extremely uncomfortable. Even so, Z kept on the mask of a loving uncle, and no one discovered his perverse desire for his niece. This meant that Brenda had to live with her abuser for a whole year after her family died, and during that time, Z's twisted behavior started to escalate. Brenda has said in several interviews that her uncle sexually abused her on multiple occasions. As an underage girl, she was helpless to his advances, and the police didn't realize what was happening until much later on. But with that said, investigators were starting to suspect Z. They'd noticed his strange behavior, and they decided to target him through his wife. In May of 2010, the New South Wales Crime Commission asked Kathy to come in for an interview, saying that they'd uncovered new evidence. They revealed the presence of the bloody footprints, a detail that hadn't been shared up until this point, and mentioned that they came from a specific shoe by the Asics brand that had been purchased sometime in 2005. The purpose behind this reveal was simple. Kathy would likely tell her husband about the new evidence, and police could monitor his response through hidden surveillance cameras they'd installed. When they watched the grainy footage, they saw Z cutting up a box with the Asics branding on it and later flushing it down the toilet. The box had once held 9.5 size sneakers, which matched the description of the shoes worn by the perp. It bears mentioning that Kathy was with him while he cut up the box. Did she not question her husband's strange behavior? Could she have been in on it? There's further evidence that suggests that she either knew of her husband's dark side or she was completely oblivious to it. By May of 2011, it had been nearly 2 years since Brenda's family had lost their lives. She'd been in the care, or rather clutches, of Z and Kathy the whole time. And based on her accounts, she was put through an unimaginable amount of torment during this time. They'd moved into the North Epping home once inhabited by the Lin family, so it seemed like Z's desire to live Norman's life was finally fulfilled. However, it all came crashing down on the 5th of May. Police arrived at the North Epping residence and arrested Z, who was remanded into custody at Long Beach Correctional Center. While there, he allegedly confessed to another inmate that his in-laws, Kathy's parents, were always disappointed in him and compared him to Norman. This appears to have pushed him past the breaking point. After facing multiple delays, Z's trial finally began on March 17, 2014. Prosecutor Mark Tedeschi outlined 3 possible motives for Z slaying the family. Firstly, there was his desire for financial gain. Secondly, there was the matter of his pride. And thirdly, evidence showed that he was sexually attracted to his underage niece. The inmate he confessed to took to the stand, stating that Z told him he'd sedated Kathy on the night of the slayings. Z was also known to wear Asics sneakers, and he owned a massage device suspiciously similar to a hammer that prosecutors said was the homicide weapon. What's more, Z's acquaintances said that he usually slept in on Saturdays, yet on the morning of July 18th, he was up cleaning his garage. An inspection of said garage revealed a small bloody smudge that contained DNA from at least 4 of the victims, further implicating Z in the crime. Bit by bit, the prosecution laid out a case that seemed to confirm that Z was the culprit. Unfortunately, the evidence was considered circumstantial, and the trial was aborted. A second trial began that August, but once again failed to lead to a verdict when the judge fell ill. Prosecutors made a third attempt February of 2015, but the jurors weren't able to agree on a verdict. Eventually, Z was able to make a plea for bail.
Gier's lawyer told the court the family will hand in their passports and says Gier will be monitored closely by police. But the Crown says no amount of money is sufficient, given Gier has every reason to flee Australia. The bail application came just seconds after the same magistrate ruled there was enough evidence for Gier to go to trial. He's accused of blood...
It was December by this point, and despite the flight risk he posed, the judge decided to grant Z bail for Christmas. Kathy was reportedly overjoyed, saying that she loved her husband and implying she believed in his innocence. But it wasn't meant to last. On January 12, 2017, a jury finally convicted Z of the homicides. They held him guilty on all counts, and since Australia abolished the death penalty in 1985, Z received the maximum legal penalty of 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Brenda would later come out to speak her truth, expressing her deep regret at the way she left things with her father.
Thank you for being an amazing father. I didn't get to tell him I loved him. And that was the last time I talked to him. I know. I just wish I told him that he's an amazing person, and thank you for doing everything for us. And I never told him that I was grateful. Never told him I loved him. And I'll never be able to either.
With the culprit finally in jail, she might finally be able to move on, though the fact that she has to do so without her family makes it unimaginably difficult. Kathy has maintained a low profile since the conviction. It's unknown if she still believes her husband's innocence, but it's likely that she no longer has a relationship with her niece. The victims of these crimes include not just the people that died, but also the ones that loved them, the ones that have to learn how to live with the traumatic memory of their passing. So what do you think of this case? Did Z get the sentence he deserved, or did he get off easy because of Australia's abolition of the death penalty? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.
Yes, I don't know who I'm for, who I need to talk to, or my daughter is with a family in Farmdale, Virginia, and she's been basically missing for the past 2.5 days. I can't get a hold of her. Her cell phone's turned off. What's worse is the girl that she was staying with, nobody knows where she is. Her cell phone is turned off.
In September of 2009, 4 people were found brutally attacked in their homes. Authorities described the crime scene as a slaughterhouse that stank of decay. The bodies had been laying there for several days before police intervened, even though authorities had many chances to get involved in the preceding few days. The 4 victims were 16-year-old Emma Niederbrock, her friend 18-year-old Melanie Wells, and her parents, 50-year-old Mark Niederbrock and 53-year-old Deborah Kelly. In today's video, we'll attempt to untangle the complex web of events that led to these 4 individuals. We'll trace the connections between this incident and the emerging horrorcore scene, a musical genre that Emma and Melanie were obsessed with and a community that had a homicidal maniac hiding within its ranks. Mark and Deborah were about as normal as people can be. Mark was an Illinois native who graduated from the state's university and eventually found work as a graphic designer. However, he found Jesus at some point and decided to become a pastor. In the 6 years leading up to the incident, Mark had been working at Walker's Presbyterian Church in nearby Hicksburg, where he became a widely respected member of the community. Deborah, on the other hand, was clearly a woman of ambition. After getting her doctorate, she became an associate professor of sociology and criminal studies at Longwood University in Farmville, where she mentored several successful members of law enforcement. She and Mark settled down in the small town of just a few thousand people to stay close to her place of work. On October 15, 1992, Mark and Deborah had a daughter whom they named Emma. She was a well-adjusted kid, but she eventually gave in to one of the most widespread emotional states in Middle America: teenage angst. When she was about 15 years old, Emma's parents took her out of school and began homeschooling her. This created a sense of isolation that created an intense frustration in the teenage girl. Her parents watched as she entered a rebellious phase that never seemed to end. When her parents divorced in early 2009, her life seemed to fall further apart, even though her parents stayed on good terms. Emma discovered a genre of music called horrorcore and felt connected to the over-the-top lyrics that described brutal violence and sexual assault. For many fans of the genre, these lyrics are simply an outlet for repressed rage or frustration, and the community itself could be quite welcoming and friendly. Artists in the community weren't the sort to avoid their fans. Instead, they usually formed friendships with fans and did whatever they could to support their own. Emma felt lonely in the tiny town of Farmville, so online horrorcore forums became a safe haven for her. It was in one of these forums that she met Melanie, a slightly older girl that lived in Virginia and felt a connection with Emma. Melanie also had a Presbyterian pastor for a father, so the two girls shared their frustrations at living in such a repressive environment.
Mine too. Here, now you got two.
This way. Go through the hole. There we go. Ready? Turn around and sit. Oh my God.
Another individual she met on these forums was a horrorcore artist who went by Psycho Sam. This was a pseudonym, of course. Psycho Sam was actually a 19-year-old boy named Richard, and he quickly became obsessed with the much younger Emma. Richard Alden Samuel McCroskey III was born on December 26, 1988. He had an older sister named Sarah and lived with his mother and father in Castro Valley, California, although they were born in nearby Hayward. The people he grew up with describe him as a quiet kid and a bit of a pushover. He was frequently bullied at school for his weight and for his red hair, making him an outcast among his peers. It's fair to say that McCroskey liked it that way. He was also a rather weird kid who didn't enjoy most of the things you'd expect. Throughout his childhood, he had a deep and passionate hatred of music to the point where he destroyed speakers to make the noise stop. However, all of this changed when he was about 11 or 12. During a trip to the dentist, McCroskey's father played his Insane Clown Posse CD, and the kid was immediately mesmerized by the horrorcore band. Later on, he stole his dad's CD to burn a copy of it, and his love of horrorcore began. This affinity for a violent genre of music coincided with McCroskey's performing miserably at school. It might have been the bullying, or perhaps he just didn't know how to fit into the standard educational system, but McCroskey ended up dropping out of 2 high schools before finally giving up. Now, that's not to say that McCroskey was unintelligent. He actually had a knack for graphic design and even had plans to start a company of his own. But the thing is, his introduction to horrorcore eventually derailed all of that. Pretty soon, McCroskey bought himself a cheap microphone and started recording his own music, eventually taking on the moniker of Psycho Sam. His lyrics spoke about his desire to take lives and commit assaults, which horrorcore fans took to be the fantasy roleplay that most other artists take part in. McCroskey released several songs on his MySpace page and got deeply involved in the horrorcore community. He was accepted by other horrorcore artists and showed a real talent for writing, even though these talents were channeled into a pretty destructive outlet. The boy also showed many signs of antisocial behavior. After creating a YouTube channel in 2006, McCroskey began making uploads that ranged from concert recordings to videos of him defiling the graves of dead Marines.
We defiled the grave, and then lightning struck seconds ago. I think we're being warned. And now it's starting to rain. It's because we fucked up the grave. It's not my fault. And now it's starting to rain really hard. So, peace, Negroes.
In 2008, when he was 19, he met 15-year-old Emma. They got along really well and soon started talking on the phone every single day. McCroskey thought that Emma was in love with him, that she truly wanted to be with him even though they were thousands of miles apart, and the pair shared videos to get to know each other better.
Alright, so you wanted a video, and you made me videos, so... And he said please, so I'll make you this video, even though I'm not gonna, like, do anything, because my room's kind of dirty, and... yeah, I don't want to show you my dirty room. But this video is for Emma, because you just told me to say your name. So, I don't know. I'll make you another video once clean, I promise. Unless you just want to like see my wall, because that's not dirty. But behind me is dirty, so that's not good.
While his relationship with Emma blossomed, McCroskey faced some serious problems at home. His father kicked his mother out of the house in April of 2009, something that probably strengthened his bond with Emma, whose parents had also split up just a few months ago. Emma, McCroskey, and Melanie made plans to meet up in September to go to a horrorcore music festival called Strictly for the Wicked. On August 26th, McCroskey uploaded a video to his channel called HD Testing, in which he shows all of the horrorcore posters on his bedroom wall. It ended up being the last video he ever posted. McCroskey arrived in Farmville on September 17th. Melanie had also flown in and was staying with Emma and Deborah at the time. Deborah had some concerns about letting an older boy stay in the same home as her daughter, but seeing Emma happy for the first time since the divorce made her change her mind. She agreed to let McCroskey stay, but said that the trio could only go to the horrorcore festival if she and Mark could accompany them. While McCroskey flew to Virginia, Emma posted on his MySpace saying that by the time he saw the post, he'd be in her home. She told him how much she loved him and how excited she was that she'd finally get to meet him. However, it seems like things didn't go according to plan because McCroskey wasn't who Emma thought he'd be. Despite being 20 years old at this point, McCroskey still acted like a child. His behavior put Emma off, but since they'd already made plans to go to the festival, she decided to be polite and see it through. The prospect of watching her favorite horrorcore bands was too good to pass up, and even if McCroskey was a disappointment, she'd still be able to have a good time with Melanie. On September 12th, Mark and Deborah set off on the 10-hour drive to Michigan, where the festival was being held. McCroskey must have been excited to spend some time with Emma, who he considered to be his girlfriend, but Emma had other plans. People that knew her say that she'd never called McCroskey her boyfriend, only that they'd been getting close. There's a chance that McCroskey made an assumption about their relationship, and at the festival, he started to see how wrong he was. According to testimony and statements, McCroskey got very upset when he saw Emma flirting with other guys at the show. She also pointedly avoided McCroskey, who may have been acting very clingy and expecting affection that she didn't want to give. Things started to escalate when Emma swapped numbers with a guy. Later on, McCroskey would violate her privacy by checking her messages, where he saw that the guy had asked Emma to be his girlfriend. No one noticed anything unusual about McCroskey, though. He seemed to have kept the lid on his turbulent emotion, and the group returned to Farmville in the early hours of September 14th. At about 2:43 a.m., Melanie posted to MySpace about how much fun she'd had at the show, how she missed her family, and that she'd be back home on the 16th. As she posted these messages, McCroskey drank alcohol, smoked illegal substances, and took strong pain medications. He claimed he had a migraine, but there's a chance that he was numbing himself for what he was about to do. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. At around 3 in the morning on September 14th, McCroskey picked up a maul from Deborah's backyard and went upstairs. He headed into Melanie's room and slammed the blunt object into her head multiple times, ending her life instantly. He went into Deborah's room to slay her, after which he entered Emma's room. There's no way to know exactly what happened, but it's possible that McCroskey stared at her as she slept. He may have even fantasized about the life he thought they'd lead together. Either way, he brought the maul down on Emma's head as well, smashing her face to pieces and completing his triple homicide spree. McCroskey was covered in blood and guts. He roamed around the house, unsure of what to do next, but certain that he'd crossed the point of no return. In his twisted mental state, he decided to do what he loved, make videos of himself. In these videos, he talks about how he'd done something terrible, something that everyone would hate him for, but that he couldn't avoid because he'd snapped. At the same time, he expressed how much he hated the world and everyone in it.
Alright, so I'm making this video because, or if anybody finds this, I really don't know what I'm trying to say, and I'm breathtaking at what I've done, and I apologize. I know I'm gonna pay for my consequences. I wish that I could have not done this, but I just lost my mind. I snapped, and I did what I did, and I gotta pay for it now, my consequences. I'm like all shaky and stuff, but like, to anybody that finds this, tell my parents that like I love them, and I'm very sorry for doing this, and there's nothing really else to say. To everybody that is probably gonna hate me for this, I'm sorry, and I had to do it. My mind just snapped. I couldn't control it anymore. That's it. Fuck you to the big world. Fuck everybody in the world. I can't stand this place.
McCroskey spent 3 days in that house, covered in the rotting remains of the people he'd butchered. He didn't take a shower. It's uncertain whether he ate or even slept, but on September 16th, he couldn't hide from the world anymore. Melanie's mom, Kathleen, had been trying to reach her for days. She knew that Melanie was due back on the 16th, and when she still didn't hear from her, she grew concerned and told her husband to head to Farmville. He spent 8 hours outside Deborah's home, during which he repeatedly banged on the door and called out. No one responded, and he ended up going back home. Kathleen called Deborah's home phone the next day. McCroskey picked up the phone and told Kathleen that the girls were visiting Emma's dad, prompting Kathleen to give Mark a call. The father was understandably disturbed, saying that the girls weren't at his place and that he hadn't heard from them in days as well. He had no reason to think anything was wrong, since he and Deborah lived separate lives and didn't talk every day. Realizing something was wrong, he headed to his ex-wife's home, where McCroskey was lying in wait. At around 5 p.m., Mark entered the home and was immediately assaulted by McCroskey. Investigators later said that he smashed Mark's head so aggressively that he created a dent in the wooden floor. Once he had claimed his fourth victim, McCroskey dragged Mark and Melanie's bodies into Emma's room, while leaving Deborah's corpse undisturbed. Meanwhile, Kathleen could feel like something was wrong when Mark stopped answering the phone. She called McCroskey again, and he told her a different story this time around. Claiming that he had no idea where the girls were, McCroskey stated that he could hear strange noises coming from the basement. Kathleen told him to call 911, which he did for some reason.
Phone 911. Hey, could I have a police unit come by my house? Because I keep hearing sounds in the basement, and I'm scared to go down there and check what it is.
Okay, what kind of sounds do you hear?
Like just noises, like something moving around down there. I think it's the dogs, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
We have 2 dogs, but one of them is upstairs. I just put him up there, and the other one might be down there, but I'm not sure if it's the dog or not.
Okay, and it's in the basement. What's your name?
Sam.
Sam?
But this isn't my house. I'm staying at my girlfriend's house.
Okay. All right, we'll get somebody to come up there, okay?
Thank you very much. Bye.
Police arrived at the home and McCroskey let them in. Despite the smell of rotting bodies, a smell so bad that even the neighbors had noticed it, the cops found no reason to investigate any further. They felt satisfied with the answers McCroskey had given them and left the crime scene. What's strange is that they didn't notice the dried blood on McCroskey. The smell alone should have been instantly recognizable to police officers, and considering the sheer brutality of the culprit's action, there would have been all kinds of signs that something violent had happened. Regardless, the police left that day and McCroskey had an opportunity to get away. McCroskey found the keys to Mark's car and sped off, thinking that he might have actually gotten away with it. Meanwhile, Kathleen continued calling the police, asking them to do something, anything, about her missing daughter. Police had made a wellness check by this point, so they felt like there was nothing more to do. Even so, the repeated phone calls and the clear signs that Melanie was missing forced them to return to the scene of the crime. McCroskey was long gone by this point. The front door was unlocked and the police entered and finally recognized the unmistakable stench of death. They explored the home and found all 4 bodies, prompting them to launch an investigation into the unspeakable crimes. During this time, McCroskey was trying to head for the airport. However, he wasn't a very experienced driver and ended up crashing the car during the night. He was captured by police, but since he hadn't been identified as a suspect yet, he was charged with driving without a license. Since this was a misdemeanor, McCroskey was free to go provided that he appeared for a court hearing. A tow truck driver came to take the car away and asked McCroskey if he wanted a ride. The culprit asked to be dropped off at a nearby gas station. During the trip, the tow truck driver was struck by just how badly McCroskey stank, later saying that it was the worst odor he'd ever smelled. Eventually, McCroskey arrived at the gas station and was captured on surveillance footage buying various items. After this, he headed for the airport to buy a ticket home. Through some stroke of luck, McCroskey didn't have enough money to buy the next flight home. He had to wait until the next morning, and since he had nowhere else to go, he fell asleep in the waiting area. The police had finally realized that McCroskey was the culprit, and they had put out the word to apprehend the suspect by any means necessary. Airport security captured footage of him, and a security guard informed police of where he was. As he was taken into custody, McCroskey made a remark that showed just how little he cared about his actions.
Jesus told me to do it.
Jesus told him to do it. According to his sister, McCroskey had a very sarcastic sense of humor, and this was his idea of a joke. But it also shows that he didn't fully understand the gravity of his actions, or human life simply meant nothing to him. Police initially tried connecting him to 2 more homicides in the area and charged him with 6 counts of capital homicide. 2 of the charges were dropped, but McCroskey was still eligible for the death penalty for the 4 remaining counts. He eventually pleaded guilty in exchange for some leniency from the judge, and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. McCroskey is currently serving his sentence at Wallens Ridge State Prison in Big Stone Gap, Virginia. There have been some reports that the prisoners don't like him much and regularly bully him, although these reports haven't been confirmed. If they are true, some might see them as a karmic justice considering the lives that McCroskey took and the horrors he left in his wake. Melanie's parents will have to take solace in the fact that he can't hurt anyone else ever again. So what do you think of this case? Did McCroskey deserve the death penalty, or is life without parole an appropriate punishment for his actions? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.